So it's Tisha B'Av 1492, and as we know, Tisha B'Av is not just a time of sorrow in the temple's time, but in every generation, Jewish suffering has been happening on this day. And in 1492 in Spain, the Alhambra decree is finally coming into being, and Abarbanel finds himself being kicked out of his home together with the Jews of Spain that chose to hold on to their Judaism. But the truth is, for those that stayed, the hell just unleashed and the Inquisition came into play, and they were being harassed and they were being destroyed and burnt, their lives at constant threat. And you think to yourself, the same question that Moshe Rabbeinu asked of God when he saw what happened to the famous Rabbi Akiva the Tzaddik, and he goes, how can a place like Spain that had so many tzaddikim, the Rosh, the Rif, the Rambam, these beautiful souls, the poems, the tefillot, the Torah, how could it be destroyed as such? How could Rabbi Akiva that brought the Torah Sheba'al Peh into this world, how could he be combed? How could he be killed in this way by the Romans? How could this life of Sfarad, how could it be just taken away? What is the reason? And Moshe demanded from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Shtok, silence, be quiet. I can't tell you. And then he goes and says something very, very strange, and it always bothered me. But as we go on this journey, we go on the journey of the Jews of Spain, and we start to unravel step by step, city by city, synagogue by synagogue, Bet HaKvarot, tombstone by tombstone, we start to maybe understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, if I tell you the answer, I'm going to have to take the world back to Tohu Vavohu. I'm going to have to take the world back to the beginning of creation. I'm going to have to rewind everything and take it back to the two parts of energy, Tohu Vavohu. I cannot tell you. What does this mean? What is HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying? And as we go on this journey, and we're going to take some people like Moses Montefiore, we're going to go to places as far-flung as Kent, and we're going to go to places in Yerushalayim. We're going to go to Livorno, we're going to go to London, and we're going to go to Amsterdam. And we're going to discuss people and stories. And we're going to start to see why HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot answer Moshe Rabbeinu. And why sometimes we just have to shtok. So as the boats of Christopher Columbus start to sail for the New World, at exactly the same time, crossing his path, are the boats that are leaving Andalus, leaving Spain. With them are the brave and the pious Jews that chose to leave everything behind and come on these waters and spread out. Some went to Morocco in Africa, Algeria, Tunisia. Some went as far as the Middle East. Some went directly to Amsterdam, and some came here to these ports, and they came to Livorno. Now, what was special about Livorno was that the rulers at the time didn't let the Inquisition have too much power. There was no ghetto in Livorno ever. The Jews were allowed to practice commerce, they were allowed to practice their religion, and a lot of Marranos, a lot of crypto-new Christians, hidden Jews, came here and started reverting back to the Torah of their fathers, to the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And so they find themselves in this city and they start building themselves up. Eventually the community built this beautiful shul. I mean, unfortunately during the Second World War, the whole facade was destroyed. If you come and look here, you'll see the beautiful doorway and the arches that have been destroyed. But the community here was thriving, it was rich. They had a shul, they had a yeshiva, they had a library. At the same time, they were also sending and corresponding with the Jews in Amsterdam. And we see their journey now. They're from Spain, coming in, settling in Livorno, in this port city, doing commerce, business, learning Torah, educating their children. A lot of the Marranos now coming back to their Yiddishkeit. And we start to see a flow, we start to see a chain of events taking place. It's now a kindergarten, I believe, so we have to be careful how we film, but ultimately this was a place where some of the greats were. It's no doubt that Moses Montefiore himself probably had his bris here. The Chidah definitely would have been here. So I've come here because really, if we want to grasp the life and the nature of the Jewish people in Livorno, one just has to look at these kvarim here, one after the other, in this ancient Portuguese cemetery. You have Chacham after Chacham, Mekubal after Mekubal, author after author, poets and great thinkers and tzaddikim of great fame. Till today there are names that echo through Jewish households and Bate Knesiot, like the Chida, the most famous of them all, who was buried here and eventually moved in 1956 to Eretz Yisrael. Even before the Spanish Jews made it to Italy, there was already things set in motion. The De Pisa family, Yechiel De Pisa, who was working closely with the banking Medici family, he was here probably from the times of the destruction of the Second Temple. He was having correspondence with Abarbanel. He was telling him to send money over so that the Jews of Spain could settle in Italy. Famously, Abarbanel wrote to him about a bunch of Moroccan Jews that were captured and needed money to secure their release. There is one family here, the Montefiore family, and they have a commerce. They're dealing in tea and trading, as this is a port city. And eventually the Montefiore family, they moved to London. However, on a visit back from London, their mother gives birth to a baby boy. And the baby boy is Moses Montefiore. And this is all happening in Livorno. Parallel to that is Amsterdam. After a century of running, traveling, fleeing through Europe, they find themselves in the city of Amsterdam. Shifting politics has made this land a land that is fertile for Jewish growth. And that is exactly what they do. They have their Rabbanim, they have their Chachamim, they have their Talmud Torah. But for some it's more difficult than others, because it's been over 100 years that they have been detached from their roots, from their Torah. Some, practicing their Judaism in secret for the last 100 years, haven't been able to fully understand the Torah and its commandments. Others, who had embraced Christianity fully, now were part of the biggest Kiruv movement, probably the first of its kind in history. So the Rabbanim and the leaders of the community took it on their part to rebuild. This magnificent Bet HaKnesset, although now empty, was clearly once a vibrant Torah center. The Sifrei Torah, laned by Bar Mitzvah boys, proudly standing up and making the bracha. These beautiful shields and manuscripts, clearly the remnants of a rich and cultured community. Up until 1942, where along with Anne Frank, the community of this Spanish and Portuguese shul was completely destroyed. 98% of these Sephardi Jews were shipped off to the death camps. The members of this community, both famous and infamous. Torah scholars, we have Menashe ben Yisrael, who is related to the Abarbanel family that fled in the 1400s. Infamous, we have Spinoza, who was put into Cherem, excommunicated by the community for his philosophical ideas. And there was one member of this community, Moses Makata, and he is a businessman. He's one of the first families to make it across into England. The Jews had been expelled from England since the year 1290, and Menashe ben Yisrael had written a book called The Hope of Israel, Hatikvah. In it, he was trying to convince the English government and Oliver Cromwell to accept the Jews and to allow them back into England so that they can do business. He had this idea that it was time for the Jews to progress on another part of their journey that will lead them eventually to Mashiach. And he told this to Oliver Cromwell, who was willing to listen. You see, Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan, and he very much believed in the Hebrew Bible. He very much believed in this idea of the Messiah. And unlike the Catholics, he was willing to allow the Jews to come back in. The edict put by the king in 1290 was no longer in place because there was no longer a monarchy. And Menashe ben Yisrael pushed for this idea. So the trick is here to find the Kvarim that I'm looking for. One of them I've looked in the archives, and I found the exact plot, but translate that into the actual grave. And there's obviously a few famous people here. They had very interesting artwork, as you can see. So I found it on the record, Mokata Moses, 1693. This is when he died on a visit here, and he's definitely here somewhere. I'm not sure if we're going to find the exact spot, but it tells us he's in row A, plot 2, and he died in 1693, January the 13th. He's obviously the great-grandfather of Moses Montefiore, from Moses' mother. It's amazing that somewhere here is, you know, it's the beginning. So this cemetery is hundreds of years old, from the 1600s. And actually we got lucky. I think we did find one of the tombstones that I was looking for, and that's Menashe ben Yisrael, who literally changed the face of the world, I believe. Definitely changed the face of the Jewish world. He was a Rav, a statesman, a businessman, a makubal, and his claim to fame, his most famous thing that he's done is he petitioned Oliver Cromwell to allow the Jews back into England, since they were exiled in the 1200s, and that led domino effect to so many things. And here he is. Here he is. He was actually here. He died on a visit. He was living in England, and Oliver Cromwell had given him a pension of £100, but he didn't get to use it because he died here on a visit, which is, you know, the story of the Jewish people. He was born in Spain, obviously living as a Marrano, because he couldn't openly be Jewish, but the minute he can get out, he got out, came to Amsterdam, and immediately started practicing his Yiddishkeit and building something for the Jewish people, and eventually changing everything. So the truth is, Menashe ben Yisrael didn't really succeed with his mission, and he went back to Holland, went back to Amsterdam without getting what he wanted from Oliver Cromwell. But there was a man, Antonio Fernandez Carjavel, who predated Menashe ben Yisrael and actually worked with him. He's one of the signatories on the petition to Oliver Cromwell, and he was here already from 1640s. He was here as a businessman, as a Spanish businessman. He found himself with another 20 families being allowed back into England as Marrano Jews, new Christians, living as Christians, and everything was going fine for him. He was extremely wealthy, he was a merchant, he had great relationships with all of the aristocrats. However, when the war between the English and the Spanish took place, which leads Antonio Fernandez with a problem, because he was Spanish, living in England, when there is a war between English and the Spain, and he's left with no choice, and he has to go to Oliver Cromwell, him and his friends, and they say, we are not Spanish, we are Jewish. And this was when the first Jews were recognized as Jews in England. And Oliver Cromwell, who's thinking, well, they were expelled by the edict of the king, but the king is no longer, lets them stay, and we've stayed ever since. One of the first requests that Antonio and his friends asked was to build a cemetery so that the Jews could bury their dead in their custom and in their way, and also for a house of prayer. And Antonio, buried right here next to his wife Esther and his son, was one of the first to be buried in this cemetery. Funnily enough, Samuel Pepys, the great diarist from the Great Fire of London, one of his first entries, he talks about going to the shul for the 30 days after, which is the Shloshim. So a great man. This is the man who allowed the Jews back into England. Finally, in 1701, The community in London, like in Livorno and Amsterdam, build a magnificent shul in Bevis Marks. It is in this synagogue that the family Montefiore from Livorno and the family Mocatta from Amsterdam get married. A union that gives birth to Sir Moses Montefiore, a financier, banker, activist, philanthropist and sheriff of London. Sir Moses Montefiore was so successful and wealthy, he retired when he was 40, dedicating his life to helping others. By marrying into the Cohen family, he became brother-in-law of Lord Nathan Rothschild and uncle of Walter Rothschild of the Balfour Declaration. Montefiore loved to travel, and it was in Malta in November 1840 that he met the British Colonel Charles Churchill. They got chatting and became close friends. Churchill gave his first speech supporting Jewry to rousing applause. In it, the Colonel said,
"May this happy meeting be looked upon as a forecast of such a connection and alliance between the English and the Jewish nation, as shall be honorable and advantageous to both. May the hour of Israel's deliverance be at hand. May the approximation of Western civilization to the interesting land be the dawn of the regeneration and of a political existence. May the Jewish nation once more claim a rank among the powers of the world."
Churchill would author 2 more letters to Montefiore, advocating for Jewish national regeneration. So eventually Sir Moses Montefiore comes to Ramsgate. They fall in love with the place on a visit, and they build this beautiful shul at the edge of their estate for themselves and for their family to pray, and for the locals. He develops a friendship with Queen Victoria, and as you can see, there is a plaque on the wall for the royal family, and this took place after his visits to Israel. So as the Aron HaKodesh and the Ark that in every shul faces towards Jerusalem, Sir Moses Montefiore, inspired by his visits to the Holy Land and the letter that he received from Colonel Churchill, he starts to think about generating a Jewish presence and a Jewish settlement in Eretz Yisrael, and he brings it into fruition. He builds Yamin Moshe, the first Jewish settlement outside of the walls of Jerusalem. And thinking about the agriculture and ensuring that there is jobs and food and productivity in the land, he builds a windmill that stands so prominently on the hills of Jerusalem. The metalwork for Yamin Moshe was all built here in Ramsgate, and it was shipped to Jerusalem. He always looked towards Jerusalem. The boats that left Spain weren't running away. They were running towards Jerusalem. So on the first of many visits to the Holy Land, to Eretz Yisrael, on the road to Bethlehem, they come across the tomb of Rachel Imenu. It was a primitive tomb with a small dome on top, but Lady Judith falls in love with the place. She falls in love with Rachel Imenu and what she represents. The tears of Jewish people in exile for years. On the road, they would go and pray for salvation. And when she gets news that the tomb has suffered some destruction during an earthquake, she insists that she's going to renovate it to the beautiful tomb that we have and see today. And she insisted that when her time comes, when she needs to be buried, she wants to be buried in a tomb that reflects, that mirrors the tomb of Rachel. And it is in this small sea village in England, Ramsgate, things start to make sense. Things, a web of centuries, start to come together, start to unravel. We start to understand what took place on Tisha B'Av in Spain, the devastation, the destruction, the forced conversions, the exile, the persecution. But now we're here in the most peaceful of Sephardi shuls probably to exist, beautifully put together and built by Sir Moses and Lady Judith Montefiore. And we start to see the trips that Moses Montefiore took to Israel, the letter he got from Colonel Churchill telling him how he envisions the land of Israel 50 years before the Balfour Declaration, pre-Zionism. He builds the first yeshuv, the first settlement outside of Jerusalem's walls. The windmill so famously stands prominently in Eretz Israel. As the Spanish exiles left, they weren't running away, they were running towards. We see the devastation and we think, Hashem, why are these things happening to good people? And like that Gemara, like the Talmud says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, shtok, keep quiet. Because if I was to explain you all of this, I would have to take the world back to pre-creation. You can't look at one point and say, why is this happening? Because Keva Rachel, Rachel's tomb, was going to be rebuilt. But in order for that to happen, they had to go to Amsterdam. They had to meet Menashe ben Israel. They had to meet the Maranos of England. They had to meet Oliver Cromwell. They had to be in Livorno. They had to be with the Medicis. All this had to come together. And finally Balfour and Bezrat Hashem Mashiach.